Hi, welcome to this edition of Book Break. My name is Roger, and today I will be reading some excerpts from The Cricket in Times Square by George Selden. It is geared toward grades 4 and up. With that said, let's get started. Chapter 1, Tucker. A mouse was looking at Mario. The mouse's name was Tucker, and he was sitting in the opening of an abandoned drain pipe in the subway station at Times Square. The drain pipe was his home. Back a few feet in the wall, it opened out into a pocket that Tucker had filled with the bits of paper and shreds of cloth he'd collected. And when he wasn't collecting, scrounging as he called it, or sleeping, he liked to sit at the opening of the drain pipe and watch the world go by. At least as much of the world as hurried through the Times Square subway station. Tucker finished the last few breadcrumbs of a cookie and licked off his whiskers. Every Saturday night now, for almost a year, he had watched Mario tending his father's newsstand. On weekdays, of course, the boy had to get up early, but over the weekends, Papa Bellini let him take his part in helping out the family business. Far into the night, Mario waited. Papa hoped that by staying open as late as possible, his newsstand might get some of the business that would otherwise have gone to the larger stands. But there wasn't much business tonight. The poor kid might as well go home, murmured Tucker Mouse to himself. He looked around the station. The bustle of the day had long since subsided, and even the nighttime crowds returning from the theaters and movies had vanished. Now and then a person or two would come down one of the many stairs that led from the street and dart through the station. But at this hour, everyone was in a hurry to go to bed. On the lower level, the trains were running much less often. There would be a long stretch of silence, then the mounting roar as a string of cars approached Times Square, then a pause while it let off old passengers and took on new ones, and finally the rush of sound as it disappeared up the dark tunnel. And the hush fell again. There was an emptiness in the air. The whole station seemed to be waiting for the crowds of people it needed. Tucker Mouse looked back at Mario. He was sitting on a three-legged stool behind the counter of the newsstand. In front of him, all the magazines and newspapers were displayed as neatly as he knew how to make them. Papa Bellini had made the newsstand himself many years ago. The space inside was big enough for Mario, but Mama and Papa were cramped when they took their turn. A shelf ran along one side, and on it, there was a second-hand radio, a box of Kleenex, a box of kitchen matches, a cash register, and an alarm clock. The cash register had one drawer, which was always open. It had gotten stuck once with all the money the Bellinis had in the world inside it. So Papa decided it would be safer never to shut it again. When the stand was closed for the night, the money that was left there to start off the new day was perfectly safe because Papa had also made a big wooden cover with a lock that fitted over the whole thing. Mario had been listening to the radio. He switched it off. Way down the tracks, he could see the lights of the shuttle train coming toward him. On the level of the station where the newsstand was, the only tracks were the ones on which the shuttle ran. That was a short train that went back and forth from Times Square to Grand Central Station, taking people from the subways on the west side of New York City over to the lines on the east. Mario knew most of the conductors on the shuttle. They all liked him and came over to talk between trips. The train screeched to a stop beside the newsstand, blowing a gust of hot air in front of it. Only 9 or 10 people got out. Tucker watched anxiously to see if any of them stopped to buy a paper. "Papers!" shouted Mario as they hurried by. "Magazines!" No one stopped. Hardly anyone ever looked at him. Mario sank back on his stool. All evening long, he had sold only 15 papers and 4 magazines. In the drain pipe, Tucker Mouse had been keeping count too. He sighed and scratched his ear. Mario's friend Paul, the conductor on the shuttle, came over to the stand. "Any luck?" he asked. "No," said Mario. "Maybe on the next train." "There's going to be less and less until morning," said Paul. Mario rested his chin on the palm of his hand. "I can't understand it," he said. "It's Saturday night, too. Even the Sunday papers aren't going." Paul leaned up against the newsstand. "You're up awfully late tonight," he said. "Well, I can sleep on Sundays," said Mario. "Besides, school's out now. And Mama and Papa are picking me up on the way home. They went to visit some friends because Saturday's the only chance they have." Over a loudspeaker, a voice came on, saying, "Next train for Grand Central Station, track 2. "Good night, Mario," Paul said. He started off toward the shuttle. Then he stopped. He reached into his pocket and flipped a $50 coin over the counter. Mario caught the big coin. "I'll take a Sunday Times," Paul said, and picked up the newspaper. "Hey, wait," Mario called after him. "It's only 25 cents. You've got a quarter coming." But Paul was already in the car. The door slid closed. He smiled and waved through the window. With a lurch, the train moved off, its lights glimmering away through the darkness. Tucker Mouse smiled too. He liked Paul. In fact, he liked anybody who was nice to Mario. But it was late now, time to crawl back to his comfortable niche in the wall and go to sleep. Even a mouse who lives in the subway station at Times Square has to sleep sometimes. And Tucker had a big day planned for tomorrow, collecting things from his home and snapping up bits of food that fell from the lunch counters all over the station. He was just about to turn into the drain pipe when he heard a very strange sound. Now, Tucker Mouse had heard almost all the sounds that can be heard in New York City. He had heard the rumble of subway trains and the shriek their iron wheels make when they go around a corner. From above, through the iron grills that open onto the streets, he had heard the thrumming of the rubber tires of automobiles and the hooting of their horns and the howling of their brakes. And he had heard the babble of voices when the station was full of human beings and the barking of the dogs that some of them had on leashes, birds, the pigeons of New York, and cats, and even the high purring of airplanes above the city Tucker had heard. But in all his days, and on all his journeys through the greatest city in the world, Tucker had never heard a sound quite like this one. Chapter 2, Mario. Mario heard the sound too. He stood up and listened intently. The noise of the shuttle rattled off into silence. From the streets above came the quiet murmur of the late traffic. There was a noise of rustling nothingness in the station. Still, Mario listened, straining to catch the mysterious sound. And there it came again. It was like a quick stroke across the string of a violin, or like a harp that had been plucked suddenly. If a leaf in a green forest, far from New York City, had fallen at midnight through the darkness into a thicket, it might have sounded just like that. Mario thought he knew what it was. The summer before, he had gone to visit a friend who lived on Long Island. One afternoon, as the low sun reached long yellow fingers through the tall grass, he had stopped beside a meadow to listen to just such a noise. But there had been many of them, a chorus. Now there was only one. Faintly, it came again through the subway station. Mario slipped out of the newsstand and stood waiting. The next time he heard the sound, he went toward it. It seemed to come from one corner next to the stairs that led up to 42nd Street. Softly, Mario went toward the spot. For several minutes, there was only the whispering silence. Whatever it was that was making the sound had heard him coming and was quiet. Silently, Mario waited. Then he heard it again, rising from the pile of waste papers and soot that had been blown against the concrete wall. He went down and very gently began to lift off the papers. One by one, he inspected them and laid them to one side. Down near the bottom of the papers, Mario reached for the floor and felt around. He began to feel with his hands through dust and soot, and wedged in a crack under all the refuse, he found what he had been looking for. It was a little insect, about an inch long and covered with dirt. It had 6 legs, 2 long antennae on its head, and what seemed to be a pair of wings folded on its back. Holding his discovery as carefully as his fingers could, Mario lifted the insect up and rested him on the palm of his hand. "A cricket!" he exclaimed. Keeping his cupped hand very steady, Mario walked back to the newsstand. The cricket didn't move, and he didn't make that little musical noise anymore. He just lay perfectly still, as if he were sleeping or frightened to death. Mario pulled out a Kleenex and laid the cricket on it. Then he took another and started to dust him off ever so softly. He tapped the hard black shell and the antenna and legs and wings. Gradually, the dirt that had collected on the insect fell away. His true color was still black, but now it had a bright, glossy sheen. When Mario had cleaned off the cricket as much as he could, he hunted around the floor of the station for a matchbox. In a minute, he'd found one and knocked out one end. Then he folded a sheet of Kleenex, tucked it in the box, and put the cricket in. It made a perfect little bed. The cricket seemed to like his new home. He moved around a few times and settled himself comfortably. Mario sat for a time, just looking. He was so happy and excited that when anyone walked through the station, he forgot to shout, "Newspapers! Magazines!" Then a thought occurred to him. Perhaps the cricket was hungry. He rummaged through his jacket pocket and found a piece of chocolate that had been left over from supper. Mario broke off one corner and held it out to the cricket. Cautiously, the insect lifted his head to the chocolate. He seemed to smell it a moment, then took a little bit. A shiver of pleasure went over Mario as the cricket ate from his hand. Chapter 3, Chester. Tucker Mouse had been watching the Bellinis and listening to what they said. Next to scrounging, eavesdropping on humans was what he enjoyed most. That was one of the reasons he lived in the Times Square subway station. As soon as the family disappeared, he darted across the floor and scooted up to the newsstand. At one side, the boards had separated, and there was a little space he could jump through. He'd been in a few times, just exploring. For a moment, he stood under the three-legged stool, letting his eyes get used to the darkness. Then he jumped up on it. "Psst," he whispered. Hey, you up there! Are you awake?" There was no answer. "Psst, psst, hey," Tucker whispered again, louder. From above the shelf came a scuffling, like little feet feeling their way to the edge. "Who is that going psst?" said the voice. "It's me, Tucker, down on the stool." A black head with two shiny eyes peered down at him. "Who are you?" "A mouse," said Tucker. "Who are you?" "I'm Chester Cricket," said the cricket. He had a high musical voice. Everything he said seemed to be spoken to an unheard melody. "My name's Tucker," said Tucker Mouse. "Can I come up?" "I guess so," said Chester Cricket. "This isn't my house anyway." Tucker jumped up beside the cricket and looked him all over. "A cricket," he said admiringly. "So you're a cricket. I never saw one before." "I've seen many mice before," the cricket said. "I knew quite a few back in Connecticut." "Is that where you're from?" asked Tucker. "Yes," said Chester. "I guess I'll never see it again," he added wistfully. "How did you get to New York?" asked Tucker Mouse. "How did I get to New York?" sighed the cricket. "It's a long story." "Tell me," said Tucker, settling back on his haunches. He loved to hear stories. It was almost as much fun as eavesdropping, if the story was true. That's a little bit from The Cricket in Times Square by George Selden. It's a great read. I hope you check it out, and I will see you again really soon for another book break. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us at youthservices@olpl.org. Take care.